A gentle hush falls over the starlit glade as Elrond, half elven, gathers the children close. He carries the weight of ancient stories, tales of the Second Age, filled with both luminous creation and profound loss. Stories that must be shared before they fade like morning mist. These are not just legends, they are vital lessons about pride, power, and the fragile alliances that once saved the world. By the end of our time together, you will hold the entire epic history of this foundational age, from the forging of the Rings of Power to the great alliance that stood against the shadow. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you? As we settle in for this story, we will uncover why the elves' greatest creations were also their gravest peril, and how a sunken kingdom's ambition reshaped the very world. What does it truly mean to preserve a light against an ever-encroaching dark? The air in Ost-in-Nedhill hummed with a new music, the ring of hammers not of war, but of creation. Under the guidance of the fair and wise Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, the elf-smith Celebrimbor reached the pinnacle of his art. His heart, burning with a noble desire to heal the hurts of the world and preserve all that was good and beautiful, poured itself into 16 magnificent rings. These were not weapons of conquest, but instruments of preservation, designed to slow the decay of time itself and make the lands of Middle-earth as timeless as the undying lands in the West. For a brief, golden season, it seemed they had succeeded. The elven realms flourished with a renewed light, and the air itself felt charged with peace and potential. Yet a subtle shadow began to lengthen. Celebrimbor, in his solitary moments, felt a creeping unease, a silent question echoing in the stillness of his forge. The knowledge Annatar had shared was profound, yet it felt borrowed. It was not a slow, earned understanding that had grown from his own people's traditions, but a complete and perfect system handed to him, a gift that asked for no price. This unease grew into a chilling suspicion. Working in secret, driven by a fear he could no longer ignore, Celebrimbor used his own pure craft, unsullied by Annatar's teachings, to create 3 final rings. These were the greatest of all, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, rings of fire, water, and air, and he forged them alone. As he lifted the last of the 3 from its mold, a profound silence fell. It was in that silence that the terrible truth crashed upon him. The craft they had so joyfully learned was a trap, its very design a conduit for a will far darker than he had ever conceived. The 16 rings, though beautiful and powerful, were subtly linked to a master ring, a controlling will that could, in time, dominate all who wore them. The elves' moment of triumph was in fact the moment of their greatest peril. They had built cages of light, and the key was held in the hand of the very one who had taught them the design. Their joy curdled into a whisper of dread, a horrifying realization that their greatest works to preserve the world had instead placed it in the gravest danger. What do you do when you discover the foundation of your hope is built upon a lie? Far away in the land of Mordor, in the heart of the fiery mountain Orodruin, a final, terrible work was completed. Into its golden essence, Sauron poured a great measure of his own power, his cruelty, and his will to dominate all life. This was the One Ring, the ruling ring, crafted to bind and control all the other rings of power. The moment its form cooled in the mountain's fire, a proclamation of intent echoed across the world, a wave of pure malice that only the most perceptive could hear. It was a declaration of ownership, a psychic shout that said, "I see you, I made you, and you are mine." In the peaceful halls of Eregion, Celebrimbor heard it. The call of the One Ring slammed into his mind, a violent tide washing away the last of his doubts. He felt the dark will behind it, a familiar presence he now recognized as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. The beautiful knowledge he had been given was a poison, and the rings he had forged with such hope were chains waiting to be clasped. His heart did not just break with the shame of his error, it shattered with the understanding of what was to come. He had armed the enemy with the very tools to enslave them all. Panic ignited into a desperate resolve. Sauron did not yet know of the three, the rings Celebrimbor had forged alone and in secret. They were uncorrupted, free from the taint of the One, but they were not safe. If Sauron claimed the One Ring, even their pure power would inevitably bend to his command. So began a frantic, secretive race against the shadow. The three elven rings had to be hidden, scattered far from the Dark Lord's grasp. They were sent to the wisest and most powerful of the Eldar, to be kept safe and used only in the direst need, for their use would now reveal their location to the ever-searching eye. Trust was utterly shattered, replaced by a cold, gripping fear. The shadow that had been creeping at the edges of the world now took a definitive shape, and the very air of Middle-earth grew thick with the promise of a war for its very soul. The forges of Ostinedhill fell silent, their creative fires extinguished by the smoke of approaching war. Sauron's patience had ended, and his legions, countless and cruel, poured from the dark land of Mordor like a tide of iron and shadow. The elven smiths, artists who had once shaped beauty, were now forced to take up swords they never wished to wield, forming a desperate defense around their beloved city. The air, once fragrant with spring, grew heavy with the scent of fear and the distant thunder of war drums. In the midst of this chaos, Celebrimbor faced a choice that would tear at his very soul. He knew Eregion was likely doomed, a beautiful leaf about to be torn from the tree. His people needed every warrior, every leader to stand with them. Yet he also knew that if the three rings were captured, all hope for the future would be lost. With a heavy heart, he made the fateful decision to send them away. Nenya, the Ring of Water, was borne by a swift messenger to the Lady Galadriel in the distant, wooded realm of Lothlorien. Narya, the Ring of Fire, and Vilya, the Ring of Air, were sent to the High King Gil-galad in Lindon, a land bordering the sea. This act was not without conflict, for some saw it as their leader abandoning their cause in its darkest hour. But Celebrimbor remained, choosing to share the fate of his people, protecting their greatest hope even as he prepared to face his end. The conflict that followed was long and bitter, a brutal clash that tested the very limits of elven resilience. The great doors of the House of the Myrdain, once thrown open in welcome to a Lord of Gifts, now became a final, desperate barricade. Celebrimbor stood before them, not as a smith but as a warrior, his hammer stained and his heart a fortress of grim resolve. He knew these ornate doors, which he himself had helped design, would not hold forever against the relentless tide of orcs. Each thunderous blow against the wood was a drumbeat counting down his final moments. His sacrifice was not a grand, sweeping victory, but a calculated, heartbreaking choice. By drawing the full fury of the enemy upon himself and his most loyal guards, he created a precious window of time. Through hidden passes and secret ways, the survivors of Ostinedhill, the artists and scholars and children, fled westward into the gathering dusk, carrying with them the scattered embers of their culture. Celebrimbor fell not in the open field, but at the very threshold of his life's work, his final breath a silent testament to the cost of his creation. The enemy did not merely defeat him, they defiled his legacy, taking his broken form as a trophy to their dark master. In that single, brutal act, the fate of the rings was sealed in a new way, their legacy now forever intertwined with this profound loss and the desperate hope of those who escaped. The city itself was left as a hollow echo, its graceful towers toppled and its forges cold. For years after, elven travelers would avoid that valley, speaking of a palpable sorrow that lingered in the very air, a permanent scar upon the land serving as the most solemn of reminders. It was a lesson etched in stone and memory, warning that the road paved with the best of intentions could still lead to the deepest of ruins. What becomes of a beautiful dream after its dreamer is gone? It falls to others to carry its fragile light into the encroaching dark. With the memory of Ostinedhill's fall burning in his mind, Elrond led the shattered survivors on a desperate trek eastward. They were not an army, but a procession of grief, carrying with them only what they could salvage, their spirits as weary as their bodies. They sought a place not of grandeur, but of concealment and solace, a deep cleft in the misty mountains where the roaring Brúinen River carved a hidden valley. Here, surrounded by steep, wooded slopes and the ever-present music of falling water, Elrond made his fateful decision. This would not be another glorious city of spires and open squares, a target for the enemy's envy. This would be a sanctuary, a last homely house. He named it Imladris, but to those who found shelter there, it would become known as Rivendell. Its foundations were laid not only with stone and timber, but with the very essence of elven resilience, a deliberate act of preservation in a world growing ever darker. Every archway was designed to frame a glimpse of the stars. Every open hall was built to catch the sound of the river and the rustle of leaves, ensuring that the beauty of the world, so threatened outside, would thrive within. It became a fortress of a different kind, its primary defense being not high walls, though it had them, but its profound secrecy and the power of Elrond's own ring, Vilja, which he now wielded to sustain and protect this new haven. The air itself in Rivendell seemed to hold a gentle, golden light, and time flowed more slowly, allowing wounds, both physical and of the heart, to slowly heal. From this quiet, secluded refuge, a new kind of resistance was born. It was not a mustering of armies, but a gathering of wisdom. Here, the lore of the elves, their histories, their songs, and their maps were meticulously preserved, copied, and studied. Messengers and scouts from the remaining free peoples, men and dwarves alike, could find rest and counsel within its welcoming halls. Rivendell became a central point, a quiet, beating heart in the struggle against the shadow, a place where strategies were whispered over ancient maps and alliances were gently forged in shared hope. In choosing to create a refuge of memory and light, Elrond had built something far more enduring than a castle. He had built a beacon, and its gentle, steadfast glow would guide the free peoples of Middle-earth for thousands of years to come. What does it take to build a shelter that can outlast an age of shadow? It requires more than strength. It requires the unwavering will to remember what is worth saving. From the high towers of Lindon, a new light appeared on the western horizon. Not the creeping fire of orc torches, but the brilliant white sails of a fleet greater than any Middle-earth had ever seen. The Númenóreans had come. These were not merely men, but a people raised up by the gods, taller and wiser, their lives spanning centuries. Their king, Tar Minister, had heard the desperate pleas of the Elven king Gil-galad, and moved by the ancient bonds between their peoples, had sent his invincible armada across the sea. When their ships ran aground on the beaches of Middle-earth, the very earth seemed to tremble, not with fear, but with a sudden, fierce hope. Their armies, clad in bright steel and bearing banners of stars, swept into the fray with a discipline and power that shattered Sauron's advancing legions. The tide of war, which had been flowing so inexorably toward darkness, was turned back in a single, thunderous clash. The immediate threat was broken, and the free peoples breathed a collective sigh of relief, their gratitude for this salvation immeasurable. Yet, as the Númenórean soldiers marched through the broken lands they had helped to save, a more complex reality began to emerge. They walked with an air not just of allies, but of masters. They looked upon the vast, untamed wilderness of Middle-earth and saw not ancient sovereign realms, but lands waiting for order, for the touch of their superior craft. Their pride was not the petty arrogance of a bully, but a deep-seated conviction, born of their long years and immense power, that their way was the pinnacle of civilization. The alliance was forged in victory, but its metal was mixed with a subtle tension. The elves, grateful yet wary, remembered the lessons of Anata's gifts, how help could come with hidden chains. Now they beheld these magnificent men, their saviors, who seemed to look upon all of Middle-earth as a lesser world in need of their governance. The shadow of Sauron had been pushed back, but in its place rose a new, more complicated shadow, the long shadow of a towering ambition cast by the very ones who had brought the light. How do you thank a rescuer who seems to believe the entire world now belongs to them? 7 long years the shadow of the Dark Tower lay across the land. Barad-dûr, a pinnacle of malice forged from iron and dark sorcery, stood unyielding against the allied hosts of elves and men. This was no swift, glorious battle, but a grinding war of attrition, a test of spirit as much as of strength. The air around the fortress was perpetually thick with the reek of ash and the low, constant hum of some dark power, a sound that frayed the nerves and seeped into the bones of even the most steadfast warriors. Inside their war councils, lit by flickering lanterns, Elrond and the Númenórean commanders pored over maps that seemed to change with each new moon. Sauron's defenses were not static walls, they were a living, breathing extension of his cunning. Tunnels would collapse behind advancing troops, new fortifications of black rock would appear overnight, and strange, lingering sicknesses would sweep through the camps, illnesses that no healer could fully explain. Every strategy had to be adapted, every assumption questioned. The Númenóreans, accustomed to decisive naval victories, found their immense power baffled by this slow, draining stalemate. Their frustration was a palpable force in the command tents. They argued for grand, direct assaults, believing their unmatched valor could shatter the gates. Elrond, whose memory held the fall of Eregion, counseled patience and cunning, understanding that to charge headlong into Sauron's traps was to play directly into his hands. This tension, the clash between the unwavering pride of men and the long, sorrowful patience of the elves, became a second front in the war, a subtle conflict fought over strategy tables. The shared hardship of those years, the endless watch through rain and blistering sun, the constant loss of friends, began to etch lines of weariness on every face. It forged a grim, practical bond between the allies, a respect born not from admiration, but from shared suffering. They learned to trust each other's different strengths, the elven knowledge of the land and its secrets blending with the Númenórean mastery of siegecraft and discipline. How does a shared struggle, day after day for 7 years, reshape the very soul of an alliance? It either breaks it entirely or tempers it into something unbreakable. The grinding siege of Barad-dûr ended not with a climactic duel, but with a sudden, shocking surrender. Sauron, perceiving the utter destruction of his physical armies, laid down his own form, allowing himself to be taken captive by the victorious Númenórean commanders. To them, this was the ultimate trophy, the living embodiment of their enemy delivered in chains. They saw a being of immense power, now humbled and seemingly at their mercy, a prize to be paraded back to their island kingdom as proof of their undisputed might. The war was declared over, and a collective, weary relief settled over Middle-earth. Yet in the quiet camps of the elves, this victory felt hollow, even ominous. Elrond and Gil-galad did not celebrate. They looked upon this easy capture with a deep and chilling unease, for they understood that Sauron's greatest weapon was never his armies, but his voice. They feared the corruption such a cunning prize would bring to the hearts of men, a danger far more insidious than any open battle. A false peace descended, a fragile season where the shadow was not destroyed, but merely transplanted, carried across the sea to the very heart of the world's greatest kingdom. What happens when your enemy willingly walks into your most sacred halls, not with a sword, but with a whisper? The most venomous threats often arrive cloaked in the guise of submission. In Númenor, Sauron was placed not in a dank cell, but in gilded chambers, treated as a political captive of immense value. He was a puzzle to be solved, a source of ancient knowledge to be mined. And he began to speak, his words not of defiance but of flattery and shared grievance. He praised the Númenóreans for their strength, their glory, their right to dominate the lands of Middle-earth. Slowly, skillfully, he turned their own simmering discontent into a roaring fire. He did not need to break chains, for he was patiently, methodically, forging new ones in the minds of his captors, weaving a web of influence that would soon eclipse even the power of their king. The peace that had been won with so much bloodshed was becoming a prelude to a far greater and more intimate downfall. From his gilded prison, Sauron's voice became a soft, insidious poison, dripping into the ear of King Ar-Pharazôn. He never spoke of conquest or darkness directly. Instead, he spun a web of flattery and fear, questioning the very foundations of Númenórean life. Why, he would murmur, should the world's greatest race bow to distant, unseen powers who had forbidden them from sailing west to the undying lands? Was this not a sign of jealousy, a way to keep humanity in its place, forever beneath the boots of the immortal elves? He twisted their ancient reverence for the valor, the guardians of the world, into a narrative of oppression, suggesting that the gods feared the power of men and sought to limit their glorious destiny. A deep and bitter schism tore through the island's heart. The king's men, swayed by Sauron's rhetoric and their own burgeoning pride, turned their backs on the old ways. They saw the ban not as a protection but as a prison sentence. In opposition stood a smaller group known as the Faithful, who secretly held fast to their friendship with the Elves and their loyalty to the Valar. They became outcasts in their own land, their traditions mocked, their allegiance seen as treason against the king's new vision. This was not a war of swords, but a slow, chilling erosion of a culture's soul. The great port cities, once filled with the sounds of elven tongues and the study of ancient lore, now echoed with the construction of ever larger warships and temples to a new, dark cult. The very air of Númenor grew heavy, not with the salt of the sea, but with the smoke of strange sacrifices and the weight of a collective fear. The island's strength, once drawn from wisdom and longevity, was now fueled by a desperate, grasping ambition. How does a civilization so mighty, so advanced, find itself so utterly hollowed out from within? It does not happen with a single blow, but with 1,000 whispered doubts, each one carefully placed to turn reverence into resentment and unity into a weapon against itself. The shipyards of Númenor became a forest of masts, a terrifying spectacle of ambition made real. Under the burning gaze of King Ar-Pharazôn, every resource of the great island was bent to a single, unthinkable purpose: the building of the great armament. It was a fleet larger than any in history, its hulls painted black and its sails dyed a deep crimson, as if stained by the blood of the old loyalties they were abandoning. Sauron, from his luxurious confinement, whispered that this was the key to seizing the immortality that was their right, a direct assault on the very gods who had sheltered them for so long. The air rang not with songs of the sea, but with the grim, ceaseless rhythm of 10,000 hammers, the sound of a people forging their own chains and calling it glory. Yet in the quiet coves and hidden inlets, a different kind of preparation was underway. Elendil, a leader of the faithful, supervised the loading of his own, far humbler vessels. These ships were not built for war, but for survival. Their holds were filled not with weapons, but with treasures of a different kind, the heirlooms of a dying age, saplings of the white tree, ancient scrolls of lore, and the 7 Palantiri, the seeing stones that held the light of the West. Each carefully packed crate was a silent act of defiance, a bet placed against the coming storm. They worked in the shadow of the great war fleet, their hearts heavy with a dreadful knowledge. They were not just preparing to leave their home, they were preparing to witness its end. The harbor was a portrait of 2 futures, the proud, doomed armada stretching toward the horizon, and the small, hopeful ships of the faithful, waiting to carry a fragile seed of memory into the unknown. What do you pack when you know your entire world is about to vanish beneath the waves? You take the things that cannot be replaced, the quiet truths that outlast even the mightiest of kingdoms. The black sails of the great armament blotted out the western sun as the fleet drew near the forbidden shores of Aman. King Ar-Pharazôn stood upon the deck, his heart swelling with a pride that had curdled into madness, believing he could wage war upon the very heavens. But as the first ship ground upon the pristine sand, a profound silence fell, a stillness deeper than any ocean. The Valar, the guardians of the world, did not raise their hands in battle. Instead, they laid down their guardianship and called upon the one, Eru Ilúvatar, the creator of all. In that moment, the world was unmade and remade. The seas did not simply rise, they roared upward in a titanic wall of water, and the very foundations of the earth were broken. Numenor, the island of the star, the most glorious kingdom of men, was swallowed by the abyss, its towering cities, its proud people, and its dark temples vanishing beneath a churning, furious sea in a cataclysm that would forever be known as the Downfall. The world was no longer flat, but bent into a globe, and the undying lands were removed forever from the circles of the world, accessible now only to the elves by a straight path that no mortal ship could ever find. Amidst this world-ending chaos, a tiny, desperate light flickered. Elendil, called the Faithful, and his sons Isildur and Anarion had been cast far from the cataclysm. Their 9 ships, battered by the same colossal waves that had devoured their homeland, were driven eastward by a mighty wind. They were not captains of a grand fleet, but survivors clinging to splintered wood, their holds carrying the most precious of cargoes. They had salvaged the 7 seeing stones, the Palantiri, a sapling from the white tree that symbolized the old alliance, and the heirlooms of their lost culture. Their flight was not a journey of conquest, but a raw, desperate bid for survival, carrying the last ember of Numenor's true spirit into a darkened and reshaped world. As the seas finally calmed and a new sun rose on a fundamentally changed horizon, these weary exiles scanned the coastlines for any sign of refuge, their hearts heavy with an immeasurable loss, yet determined to plant that single, fragile seedling in new soil. What do you build after you have witnessed the end of the world? The survivors of Numenor finally sighted land, a rugged coastline that spoke of ancient strength and forgotten ages. Elendil, his heart still echoing with the roar of the fallen sea, went ashore and knelt, pressing his hands into the soil of Middle-earth. This would be their new beginning. His people, the Dunedain, were now exiles, and their first task was to build not just homes but a legacy. To ensure their culture would not be entirely lost, Elendil established 2 separate yet allied kingdoms. In the north, among the rolling hills and gentle rivers, he founded the realm of Arnor, with its capital at the beautiful city of Annals by the shores of Lake Evendom. Far to the south, his sons Isildur and Anarion jointly ruled the realm of Gondor, a land of mighty rivers and strategic mountain passes. Here they raised incredible cities of stone, testaments to their lost craft. Minas Anna, the Tower of the Sun, was built on the shoulder of Mount Mindilluin, and Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, was raised in a fair valley to the east, guarding the pass into the shadowy land of Mordor. Between them, they constructed the greatest fortress of all, the impregnable city of Osgiliath, the citadel of the stars, which straddled the wide river Anduin, its great dome housing one of the precious Palantiri. But of all their acts of foundation, one was the most poignant, a quiet ceremony of memory. Isildur, at great personal risk, had saved a single fruit from the white tree of Numenor before its destruction. From that fruit sprouted a sapling, and with solemn hope he planted it in the courtyard of Minas Anna. This was not merely a tree, it was a living symbol, a direct line back to the grace of the West that they had lost. Its white blossoms represented the enduring spirit of the faithful, a promise that even in a darkened world, something beautiful and true could take root and flourish. These twin kingdoms, Arnor and Gondor, became the last memory of a sunken world, bastions of knowledge and order in a wilderness still haunted by shadows. They were living monuments built not just of stone but of a desperate, determined hope. What does it mean to plant a tree when your entire island has sunk beneath the waves? It is the ultimate act of faith, a declaration that the future matters more than the ruins of the past. A shadow, long thought broken, began to stir once more in the land of Mordor. The dark fortress of Barad-dûr, its foundations laid with the power of the One Ring, was rebuilt, and from its pinnacle the great eye turned its gaze upon a world it sought to conquer. Sauron had returned, and his strength was greater than ever before. In this gathering darkness, two lights refused to be extinguished. The High King Gil-galad in Lindon and the King Elendil in Arnor knew that separate, their peoples would be swept away. Only together could they hope to withstand the coming storm, and so they forged the last alliance of elves and men. This was not a pact of ambition, but one of solemn necessity. Old griefs and ancient prides were set aside, for the memory of fallen Númenor and the lost city of Ostinedhil hung heavy in the air, teaching a bitter lesson about the cost of division. From the grey havens of the Elves and the white cities of the Dunedain, the hosts began to gather. Their armor was not polished for glory, but for survival. The sight was one to stir the heart, even in its sorrow, a forest of spears and a sea of banners, silver and blue mingling with white and green, a living tapestry of defiance woven against the encroaching dark. What does it take to unite ancient rivals? Not the promise of victory, but the certainty that standing alone means a certain end. The long road to Mordor was a ribbon of dust and despair. For weeks, then months, the great host of the last alliance marched eastward, a river of steel and determination flowing through lands grown sullen and silent under the shadow. The very earth seemed to resist their passage. What should have been green valleys were often blighted, their streams running with a thin, bitter water that neither quenched thirst nor lifted the spirit. Skirmishes were a constant, grinding reality. They were not grand battles, but swift, vicious ambushes from orc packs that melted back into the jagged hills, leaving behind wounded and a deepening weariness. The resolve of both elves and men was tested not in a single, glorious moment, but in 1,000 small hardships, the endless nights of watchfulness, the dwindling supplies, and the whispered fears that travel faster than any army. In the command tents each evening, two very different leaders were forced into a partnership. Elrond, the herald of Gil-galad, carried the long memory of the elves, a perspective shaped by centuries. He saw the landscape as a storybook of ancient alliances and old sorrows, and his strategies were patient, woven from a deep understanding of the enemy's subtle cunning. Isildur, the fiery heir of Elendil, burned with the urgent grief of the Númenórean exiles. His was a mortal urgency, a drive to strike hard and fast, to avenge the homeland he watched sink beneath the waves and secure a future for his people within his own lifetime. Their first councils were marked by a respectful but firm tension. Isildur would argue for speed, for meeting the enemy's harassment with overwhelming force. Elrond would counsel caution, speaking of the land itself as an ally that must be listened to, warning of the deceptions that lay ahead. Trust between them was not a gift, but a thing forged like a blade on a grindstone. It was shaped in the shared silence after a difficult scout's report, in the mutual decision to grant rest to exhausted troops, in the slow, grudging recognition that each possessed a piece of the puzzle the other lacked. With every league they drew closer to the Ephel-Juath, the ash-grey mountains that formed the fence of Mordor. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. The sky took on a bruised yellow hue, and the very sunlight seemed thin and sickly. The tension was a physical weight on every shoulder, a tightening cord that hummed with the knowledge that the Black Gate and the full fury of the Dark Lord lay just beyond the next horizon. How do two leaders from worlds so far apart learn to speak a common language? They find it not in grand speeches, but in the shared burden of command, in the quiet moments when the fate of an entire army rests on a single, unified decision. The vast plain of Dagorlad stretched out like a scar upon the earth, a flat, grey expanse where the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. Here, the last alliance made its stand, a final line of hope drawn in the dust before the Black Gate of Mordor. The air itself grew thick and heavy, charged with the metallic scent of impending rain and the distant, chaotic beat of 10,000 war drums from the enemy host. Sauron's army poured forth from the mountains, a living tide of orcs and trolls and things of shadow, their numbers seeming to darken the very sky. Against this sea of malice stood the ordered ranks of elves and men, their spears a glimmering forest, their banners a defiant splash of silver, blue, and green in the gloom. The first crash of the battle lines was not a single sound, but a rolling thunder of splintering shields, ringing steel, and cries in a dozen tongues, a symphony of valor and terror that would echo in memory for thousands of years. In the very heart of this maelstrom fought the two kings, Elendil and Gil-galad. They were not distant generals directing the fray from safety, but warriors leading by the most ancient and costly example, their every action a beacon for their hard-pressed soldiers. Elendil, wielding his great sword Narsil, stood like a tower, each sweep of his blade clearing a space around him. Gil-galad, the Elven king, fought with a deadly grace, his spear eglows a flicker of deadly light. Their immense courage held the line steady against wave after wave of the enemy, but such prominence came at a terrible price, for they drew the focused hatred of every foul creature on the field, their lives a constant, breathless dance on the edge of a blade. The field of Dagorlad quickly became a grim and horrifying landscape. The fertile ground was churned into a bloody mire, a stark memorial to the cost of this confrontation. There was no glory here, only the hard, grinding work of survival, the shared gasp for air between clashes, and the solemn duty to stand firm beside a fallen comrade. For every heroic advance, there was a heartbreaking loss. The ground became a resting place for warriors of both light and shadow, a testament to the immense sacrifice demanded by the hour. How does one measure the cost of a single day when the fate of ages hangs in the balance? It is counted not in territory gained, but in the quiet spaces left by those who fell, their courage woven into the very soil of the land they died to save. The grand host that had triumphed on the Dagorlad now found itself chained to the foot of the Dark Tower. The Siege of Barad-dûr stretched from one weary year into the next, a grinding war of attrition that tested the spirit more cruelly than any single battle. Inside the fortified camps, the true enemy became a slow, creeping scarcity. Rations were carefully measured, each piece of waybread and sip of water a calculated portion against an unknown timeline. Commanders like Elrond and Elendil now spent as much time managing supply ledgers as they did battle plans, their decisions on food distribution holding as much power over life and death as any sword stroke. Morale was a fragile resource, more precious and harder to replenish than any arrow or spear. The very air they breathed was a constant punishment, thick with the fine, grey ash that drifted perpetually from Orodruin, coating their tongues and staining their banners, a bitter taste of the land they sought to liberate. Hope did not shatter in a single moment, but eroded like a stone under a relentless drip of doubt and deprivation. How do you sustain a flame of courage when the fuel for both fires and hearts is running dangerously low? The darkness was no longer just outside the walls, it was seeping into their very bones. The very foundations of Barad-dûr trembled as its master finally emerged. Sauron, the Dark Lord, stepped onto the ashen field, no longer a distant tyrant but an immediate, terrifying presence. He was not a man, but a figure of immense scale and shadow, clad in black armor that seemed to drink the thin, sickly light. His purpose was singular, to break the command of the last alliance by shattering its two pillars, the High Kings. Elendil and Gil-galad stood together, a final, unyielding wall against the darkness. The duel that followed was not a contest of skill, but a cataclysm. The two kings, fighting with a courage born of utter necessity, gave every measure of their strength. In the end, their sacrifice was the price of victory. Both Elendil and Gil-galad fell, their lives extinguished on the slopes of Orodruin, their bodies laid to rest upon the very ground they had fought to free. In that moment of profound loss, as Sauron stood over them in triumph, his form was momentarily vulnerable. It was then that Isildur, his heart shattered by his father's fall, acted. He seized the hilt of Narsil, its blade now broken, and with a desperate, sweeping cut, he severed the one ring from Sauron's hand. A silent shockwave erupted from the Dark Lord. His form, which had seemed so solid and terrible, unraveled like a mist scattered by a sudden wind. The will that had sustained his armies and his fortress was broken, and a great sigh seemed to pass over the land as the shadow lifted. The war was over. The victory was won, purchased with the most precious of currencies, the lives of the greatest kings of their age. In the sudden, ringing silence, only Isildur remained standing, the weight of a new age settling upon his shoulders, a single, golden circle lying cool and heavy amidst the ashes at his feet. What do you do when you have won everything, but at a cost that feels like losing? The golden circle lay cool upon the ashen ground, a stark, silent thing where moments before a towering terror had stood. Isildur knelt, his hand trembling not from fear, but from the raw, overwhelming grief for his fallen father. As his fingers closed around the ring, a new sensation flooded through him, a warmth that felt like strength, like justification. This, he declared to the watching Elrond, was not a spoil of war, but Wergild, a blood price owed to him for the loss of Elendil. It was a claim rooted in an ancient custom of his people, a way to balance the scales of a profound personal loss. Elrond, his own heart heavy with the loss of King Gil-galad, looked on with a deep and chilling foreboding. He urged Isildur to cast the ring into the nearby fires of Mount Doom from which it was forged, to end the threat utterly and completely. But Isildur could not hear this counsel. In that moment, the ring's first whisper was its most potent, a subtle thought that felt entirely his own, a conviction that this instrument of the enemy could be turned to good purpose, that its power could be used to heal the very kingdoms he now had to build. He believed with all the certainty of a grieving son and a new king that he could master it. This single choice, made in a landscape of victory and loss, spared the world from Sauron's immediate return, but it let the root of the shadow remain, a seed of malice buried in the heart of the new age. The ring had found its first mortal keeper, and its long, patient work of corruption had already begun. How does a tool of absolute domination convince a noble heart that it can be used for peace? It does not argue with shouts, but with the softest, most reasonable of whispers, aligning itself perfectly with our own deepest desires and justifications. The victory felt hollow on the long road home. Isildur's company, a fraction of the grand host that had marched to Mordor, traveled north through the vales of Anduin, their spirits weighed down by grief even as their wagons carried the instruments of a hard-won peace. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, the golden leaves of autumn falling in a silent, mournful rain. Isildur bore the heaviest burden, for in his care was the One Ring, a prize he believed was his by right and a tool for the rebuilding of his shattered kingdom. Yet as the days wore on, a subtle change came over him. He who had once been decisive and open now grew withdrawn, his gaze often turning inward, his hand frequently touching the golden band he kept on a chain about his neck. The ring, which had felt like a just reward, was beginning to feel like a secret, a possession too precious to share or even speak of. Its warmth was a constant, private companion, whispering promises of order and control that felt increasingly reasonable. The journey was not just a physical trek, but a slow, inward turn toward a solitary and dangerous fixation. Their path took them near the treacherous Gladden fields, a wide, marshy area where the river sprawled into countless mist-shrouded channels. It was here, in the fading light, that the orcs fell upon them. They came not as a disorganized rabble, but in a coordinated assault, drawn by a malice that seemed guided by a will beyond their own. The fighting was desperate and chaotic, a frantic struggle in the mud and reeds where the ordered ranks of the Dunedain meant little. In the heart of the fray, Isildur fought with the broken shard of Narsil, but his mind was divided. The ring's influence clouded his judgment, turning his thoughts not to the safety of his men, but to the preservation of his treasure. As the battle turned against them, he made a fateful choice. Slipping the chain from his neck, he placed the ring upon his finger, vanishing from all sight. He believed he could escape, that this power would deliver him to safety. But the ring, in that moment of ultimate need, had a will of its own. It was not a tool to be mastered, but a traitor waiting for its moment. As Isildur waded into the cold, swift current of the Anduin, the band of gold loosened on his finger, as if recoiling from his touch, and slipped away into the dark, murky water. His cry was lost in the sounds of battle as he was seen once more, a suddenly visible king, and was struck down by a hail of orc arrows. The waters of the great river took him, and the ruling ring was lost, sinking into the silt and oblivion of the riverbed. This single, tragic event at the Gladden Fields closed a chapter of history not with a bang, but with a whisper of sinking gold. The direct line of Elendil's heirs in the north was broken, and with Isildur's death, the strength and unity of the kingdom of Arnor began a long, slow fade. The Dunedain, the men of the West, dwindled over the centuries, their grand cities slowly giving way to wilderness and their long lives shortening. their glorious past receding into legend and then into half-remembered myth. The One Ring, the very heart of the enemy's power, did not pass to a new Dark Lord, but was simply gone, its location a mystery that would lie dormant for 2,500 years. Its loss ensured the world a long peace, a breathing space free from the shadow of Barad-dûr, but it was a peace built on a hidden fault line. Isildur's fall was more than the death of a king. It was the moment the greatest weapon of the age was misplaced, setting a timer on the future and leaving a question that would one day have to be answered by a future generation. What legacy is left when a king's most defining choice leads not to a new dawn, but to a long, quiet twilight? A profound quiet settled over the Elven realms in the years that followed. With the One Ring lost but not destroyed, a new and subtle strategy was needed. The keepers of the three, Galadriel in Lorien, Elrond in Rivendell, and Círdan the shipwright in the Grey Havens, made a silent, unanimous pact. They would not wield their rings to command or conquer, for such acts would now shine like a beacon, revealing their locations to whatever shadow might one day return. Instead, they chose a different purpose, a quieter form of power. They would use the rings to preserve, to protect, and to remember. In Lorien, Galadriel's ring, Nenya, wove a tapestry of timeless grace, where the golden leaves of the Malorn trees seemed to hold the very light of the sun and moon, and the air itself was a balm of peace and memory. In Rivendell, Elrond used Vilya to sustain his hidden valley as a sanctuary of lore and rest, a place where the past was not a burden but a living lesson, and the fire in the hearth never seemed to go out. And in the Grey Havens, Círdan held Narya, its secret fire kindling hope in the hearts of those who waited to depart. This was not a retreat from the world, but a transformation of their role within it. They became guardians of last beautiful things, shepherds of memory in a world that was increasingly forgetful. Yet this necessary choice carried a bittersweet consequence. By turning their power inward to protect their own realms, they began a gradual, centuries-long withdrawal from the wider affairs of Middle-earth. The Elves became less seen in the lands of men, their voices less heard in the councils of the new kingdoms. Their havens became like islands of a sunken age, breathtakingly beautiful yet separate. This was the beginning of the long twilight for their people, a quiet, dignified farewell woven not from defeat, but from a solemn understanding that their time of shaping the world had passed into a time of safeguarding its most fragile wonders until their own journey into the West. What does it mean to protect a memory so perfectly that you must eventually step away from the world you are trying to save? A stillness fell across Middle-earth, a quiet so profound it felt like a held breath. The great victories and terrible losses of the war faded from daily thought, becoming stories told by firelight, tales of a more dramatic, bygone era. For centuries, this watchful peace allowed kingdoms to mend and grow. In Gondor, the white tree bloomed in the courtyard of Minas Anna, and the cities of men expanded, their crafts flourishing in the absence of immediate threat. Yet this very tranquility carried its own subtle danger. For generations who knew only this peace, the stories of Sauron and the last alliance began to feel like distant myths, the fears of their ancestors that held little relevance to their prosperous, orderly lives. A quiet complacency settled in, a belief that the shadow was truly gone forever, vanquished by the heroes of old. In the hidden valley of Rivendell, however, the silence held a different quality. For Elrond, the peace was not an empty void, but a space for vigilance. His ring, Vilja, was not idle. Its power was woven subtly into the fabric of his haven, not to dominate but to preserve. He maintained Rivendell as a fortress of memory, where the ancient records of the war were copied and studied, and the lineages of kings were kept with meticulous care. He understood that the One Ring was lost, not destroyed. This knowledge made the long peace feel less like a resolution and more like a reprieve, a temporary calm in the eye of a storm that had merely drifted, not dissipated. The silence was not comforting, it was watchful. It was the quiet of a sentry who knows the night is long and the dawn is far off. How does a civilization maintain its readiness when the only enemy is the slow, gentle erosion of memory itself? The peace was a gift, but like all such gifts, it required a wisdom to wield properly, a wisdom that not all were prepared to keep. Deep within the ancient forest of Greenwood the Great, a change began, subtle as a shifting shadow. High in the emerald canopy, the birds fell silent. The air, once fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth, grew still and heavy, carrying a faint, cold tang of decay. From the abandoned hill fortress of Dol Guldur, a nameless dread began to seep into the roots of the trees and the minds of the creatures that dwelt there. Spiders, grown large and bold, spun webs of unusual darkness in the dim glades, and a sickly pallor crept over the leaves. The elves of the woodland realm, who had lived in harmony with the forest for thousands of years, felt the change in their very bones. They watched the southern reaches of their home with growing unease, and they gave it a new name, Mirkwood, for the light and joy that had once defined it were being slowly strangled. The wise, from their far-seeing havens in Rivendell and Lorien, perceived this blight as one might sense a distant fever. They exchanged quiet, concerned messages, their ancient wisdom telling them this was no natural illness of the land. They whispered a name for the source of this corruption, the Necromancer, a title that spoke of one who communed with the restless and the departed, yet a name was all they had. Proof was a phantom, slipping through their grasp like the very mists that now clung to Dol Guldur's broken towers. To move openly against this shadow without understanding its true nature would be to risk awakening a far greater evil. So they watched and they waited, gathering whispers and signs with the patience of those who measure time in centuries. Their caution was a shield, but with each passing season, the shadow in the south grew a little stronger, a little more defined, a slow and patient poison gathering its strength in the deepening dark. What takes root in the silence when the guardians are forced to look on from a distance? The deepening shadow in Mirkwood could no longer be ignored as a mere rumor of the woods. From the timeless woods of Lorien and the hidden refuge of Rivendell, from the grey havens by the sea and the wandering paths of the Astari, the wise began to gather. They were the eldest and most powerful beings left in Middle-earth, their lives spanning the ages, and they all felt the same chill in the world's air. In a quiet glade, chosen for its secrecy and its connection to the natural world, they met in solemn council. Here stood the Lady Galadriel, radiant and perceiving, the Lord Elrond, whose house held the memory of countless sorrows, and Círdan the shipwright, ancient even among the elves. With them came the wizards, emissaries from the west, their forms aged but their eyes holding a keen, undimmed light. Together they formed the White Council, a united front of wisdom against the creeping darkness. Their first great decision, however, was not one of action but of profound restraint. Though the evidence pointed to a malignant force dwelling in Dol Guldur, they chose not to assault the fortress directly. Some, like the white wizard Saruman, head of their order, counseled that haste was unwise, that they must first understand the nature and source of this necromancer, lest they unleash a greater evil they were not prepared to face. This caution, while prudent, carried its own quiet tension. For others, like Galadriel, who had long mistrusted the shadow in the forest, this waiting felt like a delay that only strengthened the enemy. So the council stood united in purpose, yet divided in strategy, a fellowship of the wise bound by a shared fear and a hope that their patience would be rewarded with clarity, not calamity. What is the greater courage, to strike at a gathering shadow, or to watch it grow while you wait for the perfect moment to act? Whispers began to drift from the wild places, carried on the wind by rangers and river folk. They spoke of a creature, a pale, gaunt thing that slithered through the deepest caves and darkest forests, hissing to itself in a twin-voiced speech. It was obsessed with a single word, a choked, gurgling whisper, precious. To most, these were just unsettling campfire tales, the kind of story you tell to explain a missing fish or a strange noise in the night. But to one listener, the wizard Gandalf, these fragments of rumor were like the first faint tremors before an earthquake. He alone, of all the wise, connected these haunted whispers to the long-lost tragedy at the Gladden fields and the terrible treasure that had slipped into the river. While the White Council debated the shadow in Mirkwood, Gandalf took a different, more personal path. He would hunt for this creature, this Gollum, himself. He did not seek a monster, but a witness, the one living soul who might hold the key to the ring's final fate. His search was not a grand quest with banners and swords, but a slow, patient gathering of clues, a piecing together of a trail that had grown cold over centuries. He walked where others feared to tread, into the high, lonely passes of the misty mountains, and down into the lightless caverns where the sun was a forgotten myth. He spoke with those who dwelt on the edges of the world, the silent fisher folk by long, dark lakes and the secretive creatures of the deep woods, listening for any hint of the strange, sad being that haunted the waterways. What he learned was not just the path of a creature, but the lingering echo of the ring's poison. The tales spoke of a life stretched thin over centuries, a spirit twisted by a golden band into something pitiable and monstrous. Gollum was not born a monster, he was made one, his long years a testament to the ring's patient, soul-crushing power. Gandalf's hunt revealed a chilling truth. The ring was not merely a lost object. It was an active, malevolent force that had already written a tragedy in the life of this one wretched creature, and its story was far from over. How far would you travel to find a single, broken soul who holds the answer to a world's peril? The hunt ended not in a grand confrontation, but in a damp, forgotten cellar. Gandalf had finally cornered the wretched creature Gollum, and in the dim, flickering light, he pieced together a story more chilling than any legend. Through a tangle of lies and hissing half-truths, the wizard listened, his heart growing cold with a dreadful certainty. Gollum spoke of the ring, his precious, with a possessive agony that was its own kind of testimony. He told of losing it deep in the mountains, and of the creature who had taken it, a simple hobbit from a faraway land named Bilbo Baggins. In that moment, the scattered fragments of history locked into a single, terrifying picture. The golden band Bilbo carried as a curious trinket was not a mere lesser ring of power. It was the ruling ring, the very heart of the shadow they had all believed was lost forever. The fate of Middle-earth was not resting in some sunken riverbed, but in the pocket of an unsuspecting hobbit in the peaceful Shire. A crushing weight of knowledge settled upon Gandalf's shoulders. He now carried a secret that could shatter the world's fragile peace. Should he act at once, rally the White Council, and move to secure the ring with all the power at their command? Or was that the most dangerous path of all, one that would draw the attention of every dark and curious thing to the Shire's quiet borders? His choice was a solitary burden. To act was to risk a catastrophic war, but to wait was to leave the most potent weapon of the age in the hands of one who had no idea of its true nature. He chose the path of quiet vigilance, becoming a silent guardian, a familiar friend whose visits to Bag End now held a profound and secret purpose. He would watch and he would wait, all while knowing that a single misstep, a single whispered word, could unravel centuries of hard-won safety. What do you do when you discover the world's most dangerous secret is held by your most innocent friend? A quiet tension settled over the White Council, a silent war of conviction fought in the language of strategy and patience. Saruman the White, their appointed head, spoke with a voice of pure, cold logic that was difficult to refute. He argued that the One Ring, lost for 2,500 years, had likely been washed out to sea or buried so deep that no power could ever recover it. To move openly against the shadow in Dol Guldur, he cautioned, would be to risk a war they did not need to fight, potentially revealing their own strength and unity to an enemy whose true identity remained a mystery. His words were a fortress of reason, and many within the council found safety behind its walls. Yet Gandalf, who carried the secret of the ring's survival, felt a chill that had nothing to do with reason. He saw a different truth hidden beneath Saruman's counsel, a truth he could not yet prove but felt with every fiber of his being. He argued for direct action, for driving the necromancer from his wooded fortress before his roots could grow deeper. But his was a lone voice of urgency in a chorus of caution. The official policy became one of watchful waiting, a decision that masked a growing fracture among the wise. Saruman's desire for the ring, a secret hunger he nurtured in the deepest chambers of his heart, had already begun to twist his counsel, turning prudence into a convenient excuse for inaction. He did not want the ring found by the council, he wanted it found by him, and so a strategy of delay served his own hidden purpose perfectly. Outvoted and overruled, Gandalf was left with a terrible solitude. He could not reveal what he knew about Bilbo and the ring without putting the Shire in immediate, unimaginable danger, so he chose a different path, a silent, solitary vigil. He became a familiar, wandering figure on the lanes of the Shire, his visits to Bag End filled with a new, secretive purpose. He watched over the unassuming hobbit not as a wizard overseeing a weapon, but as a friend guarding a flame in a gathering wind. His laughter during their long talks was genuine, but his eyes held a new weight, a constant calculation of every stranger that passed through Hobbiton and every whisper on the breeze. This policy of patience, agreed upon by the mighty, was in truth a shield held by a single, determined hand. How do you protect a secret so vast that speaking it aloud would be the very thing that destroys everything? You learn to speak in silences and to guard the light by standing quietly in its glow. While the White Council debated and Gandalf kept his lonely watch, another kind of preparation was taking shape by the sea. At the Grey Havens, the air was perpetually filled with the scent of salt and fresh-cut timber. Círdan the shipwright, whose beard was long and grey with the memory of ages, oversaw the work with a quiet, unwavering focus. He did not build towers for war or palaces for kings, but he fortified the docks and the shipyards with a quiet thoroughness that spoke of a profound understanding of what was to come. His purpose was twofold: to ensure this remained a safe, unquestioned passage for any elf who felt the sea longing grow too strong to bear, and to prepare a final, steadfast refuge should the shadow ever spread across the land and the other havens fall. This was not a project of panic but of patient duty, a testament to a foresight measured not in years but in millennia. With each new ship crafted and each dock reinforced, he was building an ark for an entire way of life. And indeed, the call of the sea was becoming a palpable force among the elves. It was a quiet melody that hummed just below the surface of their daily lives, a growing restlessness that made the starlight in Middle-earth seem a little dimmer, the air a little heavier. It was a gentle but persistent pull, a reminder that their time of shaping these lands was drawing to a close, and that a home across the water awaited their eventual return. What does it mean to build a door you know most will use to leave, while you yourself choose to remain, holding it open against the coming night? The ink was the color of twilight on Elrond's parchment, a deep blue-black that seemed to hold the very substance of memory. In the hushed library of Rivendell, with the distant lullaby of the Brewinen Falls as his only music, he began the great work of his age. His task was not to build a fortress of stone, but one of words, to compile the annals of the Second Age into a coherent whole. He recorded not only the grand movements of armies and the fall of kingdoms, but the quiet moments of choice, the personal sacrifices, the alliances forged in shared hardship. He wrote of Celebrimbor's hope and Sauron's deceit, of Númenor's pride and its terrible downfall, of the last alliance and its costly victory. Each entry was a stitch in a vast tapestry, ensuring that the fragile threads of truth would not unravel into myth and misunderstanding. This was his act of defiance against the slow decay of time, a way to give the past a clear and enduring voice so it might guide the steps of those yet to come. He understood that a lesson forgotten is a tragedy waiting to be repeated. In the warm firelight of the evening, this history found its most vital form. His young daughter, Arwen, would sit at his feet, her dark eyes wide with the gravity of tales that felt both impossibly distant and intimately close. Elrond did not recite dry facts from a scroll. He wove the annals into songs of lament for the lost island, into epic verses about the courage of Gil-galad and Elendil upon the slopes of Orodruin. He told quieter stories, too, of the faithful packing their ships with saplings and seeing stones, their hope a small, bright flame in a world of drowning darkness. For Arwen, these were not mere history lessons, they were the stories of her own lineage, tales of her kin, and the world they had helped to shape and save. Through her father's voice, she learned that the great themes of the age were not abstract forces, but the sum of countless individual choices, each one rippling forward through the long years. This careful tending of memory became Rivendell's core purpose, a quiet resistance as potent as any army. The stories were a living inheritance, passed down like a cherished heirloom. They taught that pride could hollow out the mightiest civilization, that trust between different peoples was both fragile and essential, and that some sacrifices, though they break the heart, are the very foundation upon which future peace is built. By giving these events a voice, Elrond ensured they would not be silent warnings. They became a compass for the heart, a way to navigate the challenges of their own time. The legacy of the Second Age was no longer locked away in a dusty tome, but was a living breath in the halls of Imladris, a timeless whisper in the minds of the young, ready to illuminate the path whenever the shadows began to gather once more. What is the most enduring weapon against the darkness? It is a story perfectly remembered and faithfully told. The final years of the Second Age settled into a deep, watchful quiet, a long expectation that was neither war nor true peace. A collective understanding settled over the free peoples, a certainty that the victory had been incomplete. Though Sauron's physical form was broken and his fortress lay in ruins, his spirit endured, a patient malice waiting in the unseen corners of the world. And somewhere, lost to all knowledge, the One Ring continued to exist, a hidden lodestone of evil that guaranteed the shadow would one day seek to return. This was the fragile legacy of Isildur's choice, a world living on borrowed time. In the hidden valley of Rivendell and the golden woods of Lorien, this knowledge shaped every decision. Elrond and Galadriel did not build new towers of pride, but turned their focus inward, fortifying their realms as sanctuaries and shelters. Their vigilance was a silent promise to the past, a vow learned from the tragedies of Eregion and Numenor that they would not be caught unawares again. They honed their wisdom, gathered their lore, and watched the borders of their lands with an attention that never wavered. This was not a time for grand gestures, but for the patient, meticulous work of preservation, of ensuring that when the storm finally broke, there would still be places where the light was kept safe. The stage was now set for all the ages that would follow, a long twilight where the fate of Middle-earth depended not on a single heroic charge, but on the enduring strength of memory and the quiet courage of those who refused to forget the lessons written in fire and water. How do you prepare for a storm that might not come for 1,000 years? You learn to live with the quiet certainty of its approach, and you make your home a refuge that can withstand any darkness. Elrond's voice softened to a whisper, the final words of his long story hanging like motes of dust in the firelit air. He rose then, his movements slow and deliberate, and the children followed him out into the cool, starlit courtyard of Rivendell. High above, the tapestry of the night sky glittered, the same stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of Numenor and the desperate courage on the slopes of Mount Doom. In the center of the courtyard stood a single stone pedestal, and upon it rested a silver basin where a solitary flame, no larger than a single leaf, burned with a steady, unwavering light. This was no ordinary fire, but a living ember kindled from the eternal flame of Annor, a spark preserved from the west that had survived the drowning of an age. The children watched utterly still as Elrond took a simple, unlit candle and held its wick to that ancient, tiny blaze. A new flame leapt to life, a small but defiant point of gold in the vast darkness. So long as memory endures and courage lives in even the smallest of hearts, he said, his gaze sweeping over their young, earnest faces, the light of that age will never be fully extinguished. This small fire is but a reflection of the greater lights we have spoken of tonight, the sacrifice of kings, the resilience of exiles, the quiet vigilance of the wise. It does not blaze to blind the darkness, but to remind us that it can be answered. He placed the candle back upon the pedestal, where its gentle radiance pushed back the edges of the night just enough to illuminate their faces. In that single, silent gesture was held the entire meaning of the Second Age, a legacy not of unbroken victory, but of enduring hope. The great kingdoms were dust, the heroes had passed into song, and the One Ring lay waiting in the deep places of the world. Yet here, in a hidden valley, a new generation held the light, not as a weapon, but as a promise. The stories were now theirs to carry, a quiet fire to be sheltered and then passed on, so that no matter how long the shadows grew, there would always be one more spark to greet the dawn. A deep and peaceful quiet settled over the courtyard, broken only by the gentle rhythm of sleeping breaths. One by one, the children had succumbed to the weight of the epic tales, their small bodies curled on soft blankets beneath the stars. Their dreams were no longer their own, but were now inhabited by the echoes of a bygone world, a silent procession of shimmering elven forges, the towering black sails of Númenórean armadas, and the solemn oaths sworn between allies under a canopy of unfamiliar constellations. Elrond remained seated among them, a timeless sentinel in the night. His work was complete. He had not simply recited a history, he had planted a living seed in the rich soil of their young hearts, a seed containing the entire sorrow and splendor of an age. These stories of pride and its cost, of trust broken and rebuilt, of sacrifice that buys a future, were no longer bound to parchment in his library. They were now a part of the children's own inner landscape, a quiet, guiding light that would illuminate their own choices and challenges in the years ahead. He watched the steady rise and fall of their chests, a slow and gentle tide, and in that rhythm he saw the enduring legacy of the Second Age. It was not preserved in stone or song alone, but in the fertile promise of each new generation that learns, remembers, and carries the light forward into an ever-unfolding future.
you.